everyone, it's Reagan and welcome back to another video. Today I'm going to be chatting through a very love-inspired recommendations video, just in time for the Valentine's Day season. I'm going to be chatting through some of my favorite romance novels. Now, if you're familiar with my channel, you know that the primary genre I read is fantasy. I don't read a lot of contemporary fiction. That does not mean I don't love a good romantic plotline, so many of the recommendations I'm gonna chat through today are perfect for the people like me that like romance but maybe don't want to just read a contemporary romance novel. I do have a few of those recommendations in here, but this is really a video designed to chat through some of the best angsty, fantasy, paranormal, romance novels out there, and also some books that have some of the sweetest, most endearing romances as well. This past year, I definitely upped my romance game, so some of these books you might recognize, but without further ado, let's go ahead and dive right into the recommendations. First book I'm gonna recommend is Wicked Fox. Now, this is a YA fantasy paranormal romance novel that is deeply inspired by K-dramas. So definitely understand when you're picking this book up, this is one of the most dramatic, most engaging novels you'll definitely find out there, but also romance is definitely central to this plot line. While there's magic and Korean folklore and all of that kind of invested in this plot, romance is definitely centered to this by far and away. If anything, it's kind of like a Korean Twilight turned on its head kind of scenario. This is a story that follows our two main characters. One is basically half demon, half human. She's half the spirit of this nine-tailed fox, which essentially means to survive, she has to suck out the life force of humans, aka kind of like a vampire, but more akin to a traditional Korean character in folklore. And she kind of lives her life not really making any human connections, but then one day she meets this boy who's just different than everyone else, and he also is very drawn to her as well, and they have this tumultuous kind of will they, won't they relationship, because there's obviously so many barriers, including her desire to kill him, in their way. But yeah, this is definitely a super endearing, intense romance that is kind of, again, turning that vampire trope on its head, with the main character being the female who's kind of this villainous, powerful, beautiful character that our main male character is drawn to, combining that with some really amazing Korean influences, both drawn from history and folklore interwoven within this story, and amazing settings as well. There's so much food and atmosphere and seasons as part of the story as well, and again, because it's inspired by K-dramas, it is a very fast-paced, plot-driven story that kind of errs on the side of the ridiculous. So just keep that in mind when you jump into this book, but I think this is super engaging, super endearing, and has one of my favorite romances for sure. It has a great back and forth, and I just love it so much. If you're a fan of anime, K-dramas, or not, definitely check this out. Next is just one of my favorite books of all time that, in my opinion, amongst many of its other amazing qualities, also has a really endearing and captivating, angsty sort of romantic relationship that is kind of dark and sinister at its heart, which gets me every time. I love a weird dark force that our main character kind of falls in love with, is both drawn to but also is trying to fight. It gets me every time. But the book I'm talking about is Spinning Silver by Naomi Novik. This is one of my favorite books of all time, and aside from its romance, this is also just the most incredible female-centered story that I just love so much. This is actually a retelling of Rumpelstiltskin. We follow 3 different main female characters, and all of them are kind of beaten down by society in different ways, but also very similar ways. And this is a story of all 3 of these women kind of overcoming that and kind of seizing their own power. One of the women is the daughter of a Jewish moneylender. For both her faith and her occupation, she is ostracized by society. We follow a daughter of a very poor farmer who is kind of treated very poorly by her family. And lastly, we follow a daughter of a young, powerful lord, and her family's goal for her is to marry rich to kind of increase the power of the family, but because she's not beautiful or as beautiful by society standards, she's kind of looked at as kind of a worthless drain on the family's resources. Amongst all of this, as I said, it is a Rumpelstiltskin retelling, and one of our main characters kind of deals with this sort of dark force, and there is so much angst there, and I love it so much. This is a book that has great romance, but great everything. Great writing, great ambiance, great characters. You're gonna fall in love with every component of this book, and one of those components is the romance itself. So this is really a book that has it all. So if you haven't read this, definitely pick it up, but There is some romance in this, and I loved every single second of it. Next is a YA fantasy trilogy that I love so much that in some ways kind of does the multi-relationship thing that Sarah J Maas does, but with a much more serious kind of plot focus. And I'm talking about the Finnegan of the Rock trilogy by Melina Marchetta. This is just one of my all-time favorite YA trilogies of all time. Like, it is some of the best YA fantasy I have ever read. I think about it still to this day. I need to reread it, but this was a series that when I picked it up, I marathoned all three, because at its heart, there are just so many fascinating character connections. This is a really complex political world, and amongst all of this, there's also some heartbreaking, heart-wrenching romance at its core as well, amongst many, many, many different characters. So there's so many ships that you want to set sail into the night, if you know what I mean. But again, because this is a series that has so many complex politics, the reason why a lot of these relationships have a hard time forming, or there's a lot of obstacles in their way, is because of a lot of the fallout between various kingdoms that is set in this world. And because of that, it just creates all this tension and heartbreak, and it's just exceptional. And there's so many characters to root for, because you ultimately just want them all to be happy, and they're oftentimes standing in their own way from that happiness. It's a YA fantasy trilogy that's essentially centering around a group of kingdoms that have been at conflict and at war with each other for a very long time. There's a lot of hatred against everyone in all these different places, just because there's been so much warfare, there's been so much death and destruction. Because there's been so much warfare and death and destruction through so much time, this first novel we follow our main character Finnegan, who is a prince, and essentially during all of this conflict, one kingdom was essentially entirely demolished, and all of the residents of this kingdom have been refugees ever since. And in this first novel, we follow our main character Finnegan, who is the prince, and he has a goal to bring all of his people home and kind of recapture his land. But through Finnegan, you kind of begin to realize that politics aren't so easy, and the answers aren't so black and white, and there's all of these really complex things he kind of has to come to terms with and realize when it comes to like understanding both people within his kingdom and abroad. This is the first book to a trilogy, and each book follows a different main character, and actually some time sort of passes through each book as well. So there's a lot of really intricate storylines at play, with a lot of beautiful character relationships at its heart as well, both friendship and romance and everything. And still, some of just my favorite romantic pairings of all time exist within this trilogy. So if you're looking for some YA fantasy with some great romance, seriously check out this series. Next is, I think, my only contemporary romance recommendation, but it's so cute and I loved it so much when I read it that I just had to include it. And that is When Dimple Met Rishi. And this is a YA contemporary story, basically follow Dimple and Rishi. Dimple has her eyes on her future, her career, and she's very frustrated by her parents constantly telling her that she needs to focus on marrying and finding the ideal Indian husband. She's focused on going to college, getting her degree and getting that dream job. And when her parents agree to send her to this really prestigious web developer summer camp, she kind of thinks that they've dropped the subject. Cut to our other main character, Rishi, who is a hopeless romantic, and when his parents tell him that he is going to attend this web developer summer camp to meet his future wife and try to woo her, he is thrilled, and so begins kind of like the really sweet romance. On this just being an adorable and super romantic and sweet romance between Dimple and Rishi, it also really delves on some interesting topics around family and tradition and expectations. It's a really lovely story that will just kind of capture you from page one. The characters are endearing and rootable and cheerable, and they also find themselves in some of the most hilarious situations. It's great fun, and I read this so quickly, and just one that will really put a smile on your face. So this is definitely one of my favorite romance books for sure. Next up, I have to talk about an author I discovered last year who just gave me so much like joy in the angsty YA romance genre and field. I had so many reading slumps last year, and every time I picked up one of her books, I immediately got out of it because they're just so entertaining, a little ridiculous, but in the best ways. I'm of course talking about Jennifer L. Armentrout, and the series I'm kind of referring to is her paranormal YA fantasy series that kind of has like demons and demon hunters at the heart of it. This, Stormin Fury, is the first book in a spin-off series, and actually the first book I actually read. This, White Hot Kiss, is the first book in the original trilogy, set in the same world and actually has character crossover. But this is just so much fun. This is set in a world where basically individuals called gargoyles exist. They're literally like half human, half demon hunter. They literally turn into stone. And they're also known by society at large because they're kind of like the protectors of humanity from demons who are like trying to lead humans astray, take advantage of them, etc. We also follow some demons, hey! And a variety of our main characters interact around this society in different ways. In the first trilogy, our main character is half demon, half gargoyle. In the second trilogy, our main characters half gargoyle, half something else. And because they're not quite, and because they don't perfectly fit into a box, there's lots of strain and anxiety, and of course, lots of angsty romance. It's just like a perfectly done series in this genre. It's ridiculous, it's hilarious, it's so much fun. It's also very fast-paced and has great combat and plot at its core. But truly, you pick this up because you want a great back and forth angsty YA romance, and it definitely exists in all of these books. Love triangles, love squares, heartbreak, denial. It's all here. It's all here for the taking, and if you're looking for that, definitely check this out. Speaking of angst, I also have a recommendation of A Curse So Dark and Lonely by Bridget Kemmer. This is actually a Beauty and the Beast retelling, and we follow our main character who lives in our world, and she has a rough life. Her and her brother are constantly struggling to get enough money to keep food on the table and keep their sick mother in good health and good spirit. At the beginning of the story, our main character Harper stumbles on something unlikely, which results in her transportation. She finds herself in this kingdom, and there's this cursed prince, this, loyal knight, this fantastical kingdom, and the prince, kind of has expectations that she'll be able to help break his curse because, he's the beast, she's the beauty kind of thing. The reason why this series is so great is because, one, yes, there's angst, there's great romance, there's really clever world building, but there's also so much like self-awareness to this as well. Harper is hilarious. She's constantly like referencing real life pop culture to get through all of a sudden living and existing within a fantasy world. It's so funny because it's like at no point is she like, yeah, this is normal. She's like, yeah, I know this is absurd, but this is my new reality, so I gotta get through it. She is endearing, and I really love the romance. This is a really captivating book. Another one I read so quickly, and it's just like the perfect YA angsty fantasy selection. So again, if you're looking for angst, this is a really amazing option. And the last book I'm gonna recommend is for the romantic at heart, because this book combines love in so many different ways, love for books, star-crossed lovers, kind of a Romeo and Juliet scenario, and just kind of like fate messing and also bringing two people together. It's very beautiful and again just romantic at heart, and that is The Starless II by Erin Morgenstern. This is a story of many different stories, but in the heart of it, follow our main character, Zachary, who one day in the library stumbles upon this book that really captures his attention. He realizes it's just a book of nestled stories within each other, but then he encounters a chapter from his own life, and he's like, what? How can my life be in a book? That is wild. This starts an investigation of him kind of learning about this bookish secret society and this magical otherworldly place where the Starless Sea exists. He begins his investigation and runs headfirst into a boy, and they meet, and there's like so much tension there, and they go on this adventure together, but there's also like other elements of star-crossed lovers within this story and within this adventure. The place where the Starless Sea exists, time does not move in a way that you would expect. It ebbs and flows in unlikely ways, and it's like bringing together all these stories of people that are impacted by time and fate, and there's just so much love involved and like separation and anxiety, and I loved it. On top of that too, it has great mystery and intrigue, and all the book references are just exceptional, but it also has really a truly sweet romance. In a lot of ways, I think this book is a love story. So that is why it's one of my favorite romance novels. Alrighty guys, those are my romance novel recommendations. Please let me know down below some books you love that are romance centered, as I'm always looking for new ones. And I hope you enjoyed this video, and I will see you soon with another one soon. Goodbye.